Hey, this time around I'd like to take a look at one of my favorite games for the 7th generation of gaming. Now, the Xbox 360 might be on the verge of becoming legacy hardware soon, and that does not exactly make it retro, not by a long shot to me. However, there are a lot more good video games out there than just retro ones. It's really interesting to see how the structure and dynamic of video games has changed over the years. And one thing that has never changed, though, is that a good game always can pull you in and keep you playing. And this, to me, is an excellent example of a game that does just that. Playing through this game again for this review was a pretty interesting experience. It's been a few years since I had done so, and one thing I never really understood why people lump this in with horror games and survival horror. I merely thought of this as like a first-person shooter with a lot of science fiction and socio-political themes to it, and the whole dark, gloomy atmosphere, enemies that make you jump, feeling of isolation, that really was kind of par for the course for first-person shooters going all the way back to Doom. So I never really thought about it that way, but I guess paying more attention to gameplay this time around, I began to see what people were talking about, and I think that's enough exposition. Let's just get into the game. Bioshock is set in a sprawling city on the bottom of the northern Atlantic, created by a ruthless multi-millionaire industrialist named Andrew Ryan. The story behind the game is just as much about the city of Rapture as it is about the main character, Jack. The plot of the game is difficult to sum up in a paragraph or two, especially without spoiling things which happen later in the game. It has a lot of twists and turns. You can even say that it is nearly as deep as the Atlantic itself. As you play the game, much of the story's background unfolds in the way of audio diary recordings that everyone in Rapture seemed to want to record. The bulk of the enemies you encounter are known as Splicers. They're what's left of the citizens of Rapture. Brainwashed, drug-addicted, and completely insane, answering to the beck and call of either Ryan or possibly some other malevolent force pulling the strings behind the scenes. Just who that is, I'm not telling. Many Splicers lurk in the dark corners of Rapture, waiting to spring on you. Some getting their rotting faces right up into yours. They contribute greatly to the horror feel and element of this game. And did I mention that some of those Splicers have superpowers? Yeah, that's part of the science fiction element to the story and gameplay. You see, on the bottom of the sea, genetic modifications were all the rage. The scientists of Rapture unlocked the genetic codes and managed to create these biological enhancements called plasmids using a substance called Adam and a catalyst called Eve. You can splice up and take advantage of these improvements too. For some sections of the game, you need to use them. And when you do, Eve kind of acts as your endurance or mana from other games. Adam, which was originally found in some weird sea slugs at the bottom of the sea, but later harvested from the spliced up dead. This process was done by these genetically modified little sisters, who are seldom seen with other cyborg protectors known as the Big Daddies. You don't want to mess with those guys, but then again, you could sure use some of that sweet, sweet Adam. Many of the visuals are stunning. The dark, gloomy settings are accented by some really gorgeous architecture, which has clearly seen better days. The cityscapes give you this feeling of isolation and danger, and the design of a lot of the structures and the technology has this retro-futuristic meets Art Deco kind of feel to it, which is really unique. It's really hard for me to judge a modern game's graphics. I'll hear some people say about a game that it looks like a PlayStation 2 game, as if that's a bad thing, and to me, I'll just say, hey, looks darn good to me. One thing I love about the game is the sound. I think all the weapon and sound effects are great, all the voices and the voice acting are excellent, and both the soundtrack and score are excellent. It feels kind of weird talking about both the score and the soundtrack, but that's modern games for you. Anyway, there's this kind of demented bit of enjoyment to be gotten out of brutally murdering Splicers to the tune of How Much Is That Doggy in the Window? If I was to fault anything about this game, it would be the choice of the button mapping, which was later fixed in Bioshock 2 and Bioshock Infinite. You can carry needles full of Eve and first aid kits to help you along, but the button that reloads your gun is the same that spends an Eve hypo, so if you don't have your gun ready, you might be wasting an Eve hypo. Also, the first aid kits are mapped to the B button, nice and convenient, and very easily to accidentally hit and waste those resources sometimes too. I am quite fond of the Bioshock series as a whole, and a lot of people do talk about the spectacle that is Bioshock Infinite, which to me often feels like it's a totally different beast in some ways, especially when its DLC brought us back to Rapture. It's a great game, but there's still something about the original which I love so much. In closing, I don't think I have to say whether or not I recommend this one. I think that's fairly obvious. If you want to check it out for yourself, other than the 360 version, it was released on the PS3, Windows, and Macintosh computers, as well as iOS devices. Also, of course, as I mentioned before, there were sequels, both of which had some really good single-player DLC to them, and that's also worth a look. Maybe I'll talk about them at some other time. There was also a really good prequel novel written by John Shirley called Bioshock Rapture, which is definitely worth a look, but I do say that you really should play through Bioshock 1 and 2 before reading it, because it spoils a lot of the story if you don't. A while back, there were rumors of another Bioshock game coming out, despite the fact that Irrational Games, the developer of this and Infinite, has folded, and 2K does own the rights to it, so I would not be surprised if they ever did such a thing. Personally, I feel that if they do attempt another Bioshock game, that they really kind of go back to this darker, kind of gloomier kind of feel to it, rather than the bright, airy kind of feel that Infinite was. But that's just my opinion. But let me throw it out to you guys. What do you think about the Bioshock series? Do you have a favorite game in it? If they ever do a sequel, what would you want to see? Love to hear what you think. Also, heck, do you want me to talk about some more 7th gen games? Hey, I don't think I've ever done these 6th gen games. Maybe I should do some of them. You can always suggest a game for me to review too. Just leave a comment down below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care.